Loback. We will spend 1 hour together, and I will present during 35 minutes, and we will keep 15 minutes at the end for your questions. We hope this webinar to be the most interactive as possible. To do so, you can use the chat box to communicate with us and share any comments and reactions. Please use the Q&A box to write your questions. I will be happy to facilitate the Q&A session with Anna at the end. I know we are all used to digital from now on, but before we start, some useful tips to spend the best time together. Please secure your internet connection, make sure your connected device is sufficiently charged, and maybe don't hesitate to wear headphones. I think that's all. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to use the chat box. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you all today. My name is Ana Loback. I'm an organizational psychologist and an executive coach, and I'm also the managing partner of Turning Point in the UK. I'm based in London. I'd love to find out where you are joining us from in the world. So if you want to type in the chat box where you are today, and you can either let me know or you can let everyone else know if you choose attendees or panelists. Feel free to let us know where you are. Oh gosh, Hong Kong, Paris, Italy, Milan, Oxford, Jill, lovely to have you with us today. Hong Kong, Paris, Dusseldorf, Germany, Rome, Paris, wow, so many different locations, Shanghai, Surrey, UK. Oh, Kathy, hi. Normandy, Paris, wow, 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 lots of different places. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you with us. I'll be asking you a few questions every now and again, so please do use the chat box. And again, if you want just me to see your answers, you can choose panelists, or if you want everyone else to see what you're writing, you can choose to type to the attendees as well. Now, context, a little bit of context. Why are we talking about this? Well, well-being, as we know, has been a top priority for people, especially a top consumer priority for the last couple of years, but it now emerges as a real focal point. People aren't just trying to cope with the mental and physical toll of the global pandemic that we've been through over the last few months, but actually we're also deeply concerned about our physical, but also mental and emotional well-being. We know that the self-care industry alone has risen to a staggering $11 billion industry, along with the mood market as well. There's a rise in products and services designed around emotions, and also the continued rise of the wellness market. We also see some of the industry trends around this, showing that brands that help to improve physical and mental well-being will actually have a stronger resonance with consumers in 2021. We also see inside organizations that there's a huge demand for resources, access to mental health services, and workplace interventions that are designed around supporting employee well-being. And we're certainly seeing that with our clients as well. We've been involved in designing and delivering a range of well-being interventions. So this is really the context and some of the background around this topic. And like Victor said earlier, we have about 1 hour today. I'll spend the first half hour, 30, 40 minutes sharing some of the latest research findings and also really practical strategies to help you strengthen and nurture your mental and emotional well-being. And also, if you're joining us, these are things that hopefully you'll be able to put into practice. And I'm hoping that there will be at least one thing that you can take away, that you can put into practice for yourself. But also, if you're joining us from an organization, hopefully you'll take some practical ideas as well of things that you can consider to support employees in your organization. And hi everyone from all over the world, Kuala Lumpur, Sabrina from Korea. Hi Sabrina, welcome. It's really wonderful to have you all with us. So before we start, I'd love to hear what your key expectations are when it comes to this topic. Again, you can type that in the chat box and I'll be able to see at least some of them. But what 3 words would describe your key expectations, given the background, given the context that we're in? This is a session around well-being, and like I said, I'm hoping to share some really practical keys on strengthening and nurturing your well-being. You can choose just panelists if you want just me to see that, but I'd love to hear what your key expectations are coming into this session. We have lots and lots of you joining us today, and we have someone saying practical mindset and physical exercises. Great. Insights, I'm hoping to share lots of different insights with you, all of them informed by research. I bring some exercises definitely as well, based on evidence and some of the latest research, particularly around well-being. Oh, someone said smile. I love that. Neuroscience, practical tips to support ourselves and our clients. Absolutely. Shobana, it's wonderful to see you here. Welcome. Quick well-being tips, especially in VUCA, the volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous context that we're in. Absolutely. And thank you for joining us today, Shobana. Some pragmatic enthusiasm. Okay, I have lots of enthusiasm. I'm trying to rein it down, actually. Some breath. Okay, so maybe that means a moment to kind of breathe, reflect, positive inspiration. Someone else said, this is awesome, guys. Again, I'm hoping that we'll be able to touch on these, or at least some of these. Now, we know that navigating this global pandemic has been probably one of the biggest challenges of our lives, right? Many of us might be struggling even to hold and manage all the different types of pressure that we've been under over the last year, in particular over the last few months. And some of us might be struggling to maintain daily routines as we have to isolate ourselves in our homes. We've been forced to distance ourselves from family, friends, colleagues, neighbors. We know that it's been a time of full and really overwhelming emotions as well, that range from uncertainty due to financial pressures to anxiety due to physical health concerns and lots of other things. And we each turn to our own set of coping mechanisms. Some of them are productive, some of them might not be as productive. Now, we also know from the World Health Organization that mental health problems are affecting people in economies all over the world. But in fact, the reason why we're having this conversation today about well-being, and the reason why so many people are now concerned about this as something to consider, even in organizations, even in leadership and people development, is because we now know that good health is about not just about physical health, but it's also about mental and emotional well-being. In fact, emotional, psychological, and social well-being are just as crucial as physical health. They can all impact one another. And we know today that there are challenges affecting people in every country across the world when it comes to their mental and emotional health, not just physical health. We also know that although this affects people and economies all over the world, we know that mental health challenges are closely linked to poverty, discrimination, and overall access to treatment. We also know that depression is one of the leading causes of disability in the world. It was already before the global pandemic, and we're still waiting to see what the new data is now. But we knew last year that it was affecting more than 300 million people. That's about 4.5% of the world's population. And we also know that the global economy loses about $1 trillion per year in productivity just due to mental health challenges. Now, we also know that well-being, is about lots of factors, not just mental and emotional health. Well-being involves obviously your physical health as well, even your spiritual health, if you like. The kind of the link to purpose also involves the relational side of life, how we support and nurture and strengthen relationships with others. We can talk about everything today. We only have 1 hour, so we chose two angles, if you like, the mental and the emotional well-being. But how we frame well-being is actually really important in this conversation. If we look at well-being as a state of being comfortable, healthy, able to realize our own potential, able to cope with the stresses of life, able to work productively, and able to contribute to the community. We see that well-being is an all-encompassing concept that actually involves all of our psychological and social and emotional functions. And it involves our ability to engage in life in general, in work. I love the definition from Gordon Allport, a leading psychologist, who said that a fully developed and well-functioning individual manifests three key features: a variety of interests and a zeal to pursue them, a curiosity, if you like, to pursue lots of different interests in life, the ability to accomplish daily responsibilities, including self-care, work, etc., and a mature insight into his or her external and internal worlds. So really the capacity to self-reflect is one of the key features of well-being. Now, let's start with mental well-being. Like I said at the start, we're going to explore two angles, the mental and the emotional health. If we start with keys for nurturing and strengthening your mental well-being, I should say again, this is such a broad topic. There is so much that we could say, but I wanted to zoom into two things, just two practical keys that hopefully we can focus on, and hopefully there'll be something here for us, especially this year, given the context that we're in. So two things that I want to tell you about, and then I'll share a couple of practical tools, exercises, things that you can do tonight if you want, today, or even start practicing tomorrow. The first one is focus, the importance of what we focus on. And the second one is the narrative, particularly the self-narrative. So choosing what we focus on and managing our own narrative are two things that only we can do, and they are absolutely in our control. These are two things that in a VUCA environment, in a world where everything seems to be so ambiguous, so complex, and so uncertain as well, and certainly volatile, these are the two things that no one else can do for you. Only you can choose what you focus on, and only you can manage your own stories, your own internal narratives. Now, let's look at this in a bit more detail, and let's also look at not just the research and the evidence, but also some practical strategies to help you do that. So the first one is the choice of what we focus on. And again, in a world where everything is fighting for our attention, sometimes I feel like that one of those cups in the image, actually, maybe one in the middle, with lots of things, lots of layers inside, and also lots of other pressures and demands on top of me. And that's probably how lots of us feel. But the most important choice that we can make today for our mental, and particularly our mental health and well-being, is the choice of what we focus on. Now, there are four things that I want to share with you about focus and the power of what we call focused attention. The first one is that our ability to focus on something is actually a very limited resource. It decreases every time we pay attention to something. And I love that expression, paying attention, because it's so true. There's a significant cost to our attention. Our minds can only concentrate on one thing at a time. So your ability to focus is very limited, which means we really should be using it wisely. We should be considering the things that we're focusing on with a lot more attention, because actually these limitations to attention and our capacity to focus mean that we actually need to be choosing a lot more carefully what we do choose to focus on, because it's such a limited resource. And we should also learn how to conserve this resource at every opportunity, because again, every time we focus on something, we're actually using a lot of energy, and a lot of metabolic resources in our blood goes into the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that is involved in rational thinking, logic, analyzing things, and really concentrating on something, paying attention to something. That actually consumes a lot of energy from our bodies. Again, it's a precious resource. So let's understand it for what it is, and let's learn how to use it. We also know that what we focus on actually grows. That means that our attention amplifies things. Now, even at the best of times, human beings are hardwired to focus on threats and weaknesses with a lot more intensity than positive stimuli around us. And this is because danger is encoded in our brains. It's a negativity bias that actually serves us really well as a self-defense mechanism. That's why it's there. But it can also play against us when it hijacks our ability to focus on the positives around us, within us, because the third thing about focus is that you literally miss what you're not focusing on. There's a great experiment by the British psychologist Daniel Simmons that I've talked about a lot. It's the gorilla experiment. If you Google Daniel Simmons gorilla experiment, you'll find a few videos on YouTube where he poses an exercise, an activity for the audience watching the video. He asks the question, count how many times the team dressed in white touches the ball. And you see two teams playing with the ball, and that question focuses your attention on something. Your job is to find how many times that team touches the ball. Because you're focused on that, your brain will literally eliminate all the other stimuli around you, including in the actual video. After you count the times that one team touches the ball, the video then asks another question. Did you notice the big black gorilla walking through the frame? Now, some people do notice it, but not everyone does. Some people are incredibly surprised when the video then goes back, rewinds, and then you see a guy in a gorilla suit walking past the frame, and you realize that you missed it. And you think, how did I miss that? Because you missed what you're not focusing on. You weren't focused on finding a guy in a gorilla suit. You were focused on counting how many times someone touches a ball. And after that, there's another question asking if you saw the curtains change color, for example. And again, a vast majority of people don't see that. So that means that we really need to set our filters in our brains to focus on the right things, the things that are productive, that are positive, that are constructive for us, for the organization, because otherwise we will literally miss perhaps the positives about ourselves, about the company, about the spouse, about whatever it is, or we will miss a significant risk that might be around us as well because we weren't focusing on it. And the last thing about focus is that how you focus your attention actually changes you. It changes your brain, and in turn it affects how you interpret your circumstances and your own experiences of the world. There's the saying that, you know, your experiences don't determine how you feel or what you think. And in fact, events don't change you. It's what you choose to focus on that changes you. How you interpret situations, your thoughts, which are shaped by our beliefs and our values. Your thoughts help you make sense of the world around you. And it's that interpretation that affects how you feel about things, and in turn, how you behave. There's a great quote from Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And he said that everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's way. What's fascinating about Viktor Frankl's work is that he was a therapist in concentration camps. He was in a few different ones, in fact, and when he worked in those terrible circumstances, he found that there was a key difference between the people who were most tormented by what they were going through and the people who actually made it. And the difference was that the ones who were more resilient were those people who kept a sense of purpose and an ability to stay focused on that purpose. For some people, it was staying focused on the person that they wanted to find on the other side of that horrible, horrible circumstance. For others, it was something that they wanted to do after they left the concentration camp. For Frankl himself, it was really his work, as he then explains in his book. It was really his work that kept him focused and gave him a sense of purpose. So that freedom to choose our focus is the one thing that we have, and knowing that what we focus on grows, knowing that it's also a limited resource, this is hugely important for us. Now, I wanted to share with you a very simple exercise, and it's in fact so simple that it might seem like it's pop psychology, but it isn't. It's actually grounded in scientific research, and there's some really fascinating evidence to show that it works. 3 good things, hashtag 3 good things. So simple, but it's a proven and powerfully effective way to help us manage our focus, and in this case to help us direct our attention towards the positives, and therefore it has been linked to significant increases in a range of well-being factors. Now, this was developed by Professor Martin Seligman, who is considered the father of positive psychology, which is the science that explores the positive side of mental and physical and psychological well-being. And the 3 good things is really a gratitude journal exercise that you can adopt as a daily habit to help you focus on things that happened in your life that were good. So basically every night before you go to bed, you sit down for a while and you look back on your day and you think of 3 things that went well for you during the day, the positive things of the day. They need to be specific, they need to be true. When I say specific, I mean it's not supposed to be things like, I'm grateful because today the sun was shining, or I'm alive, but I mean 3 specific events, things that happened during that day that you can reflect on, and writing down each of those positive events, and then reflecting and trying to make sense of that. And what the research found was that when you write this down, that is really important to help you focus on things in a structured way. So it's really the benefit of reflective practice. The second thing that Martin Seligman noticed in this experimental activity was that reflecting on what you did is so important because it adds to your sense of perceived control, and therefore increases your sense of well-being. That's one of the most important parts of this exercise. It actually comes from reflecting on what you did to make each good thing happen. And often we're unaware of our own role in positive events in our lives, and we underestimate our own positive impact. So actually doing this helps us increase our sense of control. And finally, ritualizing it actually builds the habit. So the timing is important. Doing it either at the same time every day, or establishing some form of ritual actually makes a huge difference as well. So really practical thing that you can do and that you can share with other people around you. And actually the research with this exercise suggested that people can really increase their well-being through this. According to Martin Seligman's original study, 92% of the participants actually increased their sense of happiness and well-being in 15 days of doing this consecutively every single day. 92% is a lot. And in addition, the positive effects of this exercise actually were shown to last for 6 months after as well. So there are some really significant, these are significant points there for us to consider. Now, the other thing that we need to do to help manage and nurture our mental well-being is to be more aware of the internal narratives that we have. Now, especially in times of pressure, when we're feeling worried or stressed about things, it's very likely that our thoughts will be mostly negative, in fact. And unless we're aware of our thinking patterns, unless we become more aware of the thoughts that we start thinking, actually these negative thoughts can run rampant, and you can feel like things get out of control almost in your own mind. Now, these cognitive distortions that you see there on the title of the slide are what we call unhelpful thinking styles, if you like. And these are ways that our brain, our thoughts, sorry, can become biased. Again, as conscious beings, we're always interpreting the world around us, trying to make sense of what's happening, right? And our brains sometimes take shortcuts and generate thoughts that aren't necessarily accurate, but we're trying to simplify our interpretation of the millions of stimuli that we have around us constantly, all the time. Now, cognitive distortions were first noted by Aaron Beck in his research at the time with depressed patients in the 1960s, and they ended up forming a central part of his cognitive theory of depression, and then later on what we now know as cognitive behavioral therapy. And before, I'll show you a few examples, and then I have a question for you. So you'll be able to use the chat box to answer the question. And again, you can either answer just to me, to the panelists, or to the attendees as well, if you want to share with everyone. But these are examples of some of these cognitive distortions, these thoughts that happen very automatically. We all have cognitive distortions, by the way. They're entirely normal. They're not anyone's fault. It's not about that. But it's really about recognizing when we are thinking these thoughts that could be very distorted, and they tend to be very negative, and they tend to shape our internal narrative very easily unless we do something about it. For example, all or nothing thinking. When you start, when you go through something and you think, oh, I must be perfect all the time with everyone and everything in my life, and that tends to result in you placing super high standards on yourself, never satisfied, all or nothing thinking. So start noticing which ones feel more familiar to you. Catastrophizing is another one. You know, you do something, you do a presentation, you made one mistake, and you immediately think, oh, that's it, I'm going to get fired, or something's going to happen. You constant worry that something bad will happen, which is very exhausting. Discounting the positive. So you get some positive feedback from a client, from a colleague, and you immediately think, automatically think, oh, this person is just being politically correct, or this positive feedback must be fake. And that results in that self-narrative of, you know, I'm never good enough, and therefore I naturally always reject the positives. Emotional reasoning is another one. I feel something, therefore it must be true. So I feel horrible, so something is wrong. And it's very closely linked to kind of the hypochondriac view of the world. You know, I have a headache, surely I have a very serious problem. Mind reading is another one that tends to happen. Again, all of these very automatic, and unless we're aware and notice these thoughts, they will just hold us and shape our narratives in a way that can be extremely detrimental, not just for our well-being, but for our performance, etc. Mind reading is another one. You're in a conversation with someone, your friend tenses up, and you immediately start making assumptions. That person has an issue with me, or with something that I'm saying. Or, you know, you see a friend across the road, the person looks at you and then keeps going. You immediately think, oh, that person saw me and they chose to keep going, and they're not talking to me, something is wrong. The should statements, I should be able to do all of this work, I should be able to carry all of this pressure and not complain, I should be able to do this. Again, it results in pushing yourself too hard. Comparisons, pretty obvious. And the mental filter as well, you know, sort of only noticing the negatives, for example. It's almost taking that natural ability that we have, that we focus on something and we miss what we're not looking for. This one is really taking that to the extreme. For example, your partner gives you a negative comment, you immediately go to the maximization of that negative comment. So which of these feels most familiar to you? Again, you can type that in the chat box if you want, just for me to see that. You can choose panelists if you want to share with others. You can choose attendees. If you don't want to share, it's fine. You can just think about it. But think about which of these tends to happen the most, and how do you tend to deal with it? And someone said in the chat, cognitive distortions all seem to be examples of moving to extremes. Absolutely. They're all sort of moving to one extreme or the other. That's right. They're sort of mental shortcuts almost. And then someone is giving me lots of examples of the cognitive distortions that feel most familiar. Catastrophizing, absolutely. Mind reading, yep, same. There are so many. So what do we do? How do we manage these? One tool, there are lots of different things that we can do, but one tool that I wanted to share with you today, which is from Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz and Rebecca Gladding. You can find this in the book, which I actually have here with me, You Are Not Your Brain, great book that goes into a lot more depth into this and how to manage your unhealthy thinking patterns. But this is one thing that we can all do. First step, so 4 steps for managing these thoughts. The first one is relabel. And this is really about calling these thoughts what they are. Identify them as intrusive thoughts. They're generating uncomfortable sensations for me. Now, this is important because most of us take our thoughts at face value. We just assume naturally that what we're thinking is a fact. It isn't. It's just a thought. So really being mindfully aware of these thoughts is the first step. And research shows that when we put a label on our thoughts and our emotions and our sensations, that actually helps us to reduce the hold that those thoughts or emotions are having on us. So actually pressing pause and acknowledging that these are negative thoughts. They're not necessarily the truth. They're just a thought, and not trying to change them. And I'll get to that in a minute, but just noticing them, putting a label on them, call them what they really are. Second step, reframe them. So now that you've noticed that thought, now you've put a label on it. This is not a fact. It's not true necessarily. It's just a thought. Then you can start reframing it and you can look at it as, it's a false brain message. It's something that is bothering me. So you're starting to analyze what that thought is. The third step is then refocusing. Refocusing is about directing your attention to something else that is productive, something else that is positive, something else that is wholesome. And sometimes it's as simple as doing another behavior. Now, most of us will feel often trapped in those thoughts and feelings that are stopping us from doing something different. And actually, I would say, don't wait for the moment when you will feel like doing it. Just do it. And often your thoughts and your emotions will follow. And lastly, revalue. Once we've been able to put these 3 steps into practice, then we can actually revalue, reassess, know that, we can't take thoughts and urges at face value. They're just sensations caused by deceptive brain messages. Now, lastly, if you want to try the 4 steps and if you want to give this a go, one piece of advice, do it gradually. Don't try to tackle all of your thinking patterns and habits at once. Also, start with the simple habit of relabeling what you're doing. For example, the next time you engage in an unhealthy, unproductive, negative thought, at least notice it and relabel it. And lastly, the best thing that we can do is just increase our awareness of our thoughts. So really paying attention to these negative thought patterns, acknowledging and accepting discomfort and uncomfortable sensations, knowing that actually it's not about, notice that none of what I said is about deleting the negative thoughts. There's no button that you can press that will make the negative sensations go away. It's not about that. It's actually about noticing them, acknowledging that they exist, knowing that, do you know what? I don't feel great, but I'm not breaking. And we will talk about emotions next as well, and what you can do to help manage our emotions, but not trying to change those thoughts or delete them, simply focusing on something else, focusing on a positive narrative, which is the key. Okay. Now, lastly, before we finish, I wanted to share with you a few keys on emotional well-being. And again, 2 things. I'll only give you 2 things because again, we don't have time for much more than that. So the first one is the importance of engaging all of our emotions. And the second is experiencing positive emotions every day. So 2 steps, and again, some research and also some practical exercises that you can put in place straight away. Now, emotional awareness is important. Can you name at least 4 different emotions that you've experienced this week? And you can throw them in the chat box just so I can see a few different examples. Could you name at least 4? Or maybe just 1 if that's the only one that you can think of, but name at least 4 different emotions if you can that you've experienced just this week. You know, emotions are subjective experiences and they're accompanied by interrelated changes and reactions at various levels. At the physiological level, when we experience an emotion, like someone is saying sadness, for example, or pride, or joy or fear. When we experience fear, for example, there's a significant change in our heart rate, in our muscle response, even in our skin temperature. So emotions will trigger a chain of reactions at a physiological level, also at a cognitive level. So when we experience these emotions, lots of emotions coming through in the chat box, rage, stress, sadness, gratitude, love, compassion, so many different ones that will generate lots of different thoughts as well, and mental assessments. But also at a behavioral level, our body language will change when we experience an emotion. For example, when we're disappointed with someone, the thing about emotions is that they're not private experiences. They're often broadcast when all of these bodily changes actually take place and people around us can sense and can see our emotions in our facial expressions or in our body language. And that's because actually one of the things that emotions help us do is respond to threats or pressure. And that's linked to lots of different things. But one thing that is important that we acknowledge is the emotional brain, if you like. The amygdala in particular, which is that red dot in the image there, is a key structure at the center of the limbic system, which is the part of the brain that processes your emotions. And your amygdala is also known as the brain's alarm system. It processes all the threats around you in your environment, and it actually sends a range of stress responses to your body. And this is your inbuilt self-defense system, if you like. It kicks into action to help us stay alive in the face of danger. But we know that some of our emotions, in particular negative emotions, can actually keep us stuck in an unhelpful cycle of this kind of stress response system that can be very difficult to then break. Now, one of the things that we can do to help us manage this is to increase our emotional literacy. And again, similar to the 4-step model that I shared earlier from Dr. Jeffrey Schwartz and Rebecca Gladding on managing unhelpful thinking patterns, this takes a similar approach, which is the approach of labeling your emotions, and not just labeling, but actually reflecting on what you're feeling, going beyond the obvious to identify exactly what you're feeling. For example, you might be feeling sad. Lots of you said sadness, stress, etc., happiness. You might be feeling sad, but maybe you're not just sad. You're sad because you're disappointed with someone, or you're sad because you're depressed, or you're sad because you're disillusioned with what's happening around you. You might be feeling anxious because you're afraid of something, or because you feel vulnerable as well. That's what's giving you that sense of anxiety. So this is really about, again, emotional literacy helps you with becoming more emotionally aware. And self-awareness is really important in terms of being able to self-regulate. So lastly, I would say, when it comes to emotions and engaging all of our emotions, the first thing that we need to understand is that emotions are data. Their only purpose is to focus your attention and to get you to do something. That is the purpose of an emotion. But it's really a long chain of amino acids that flows through your body and creates all sorts of different responses. It is your body's feedback system, if you like. All of your emotions are helpful, useful. There is, when we talk about positive and negative emotions, it's important that we explain that this is not about judging or judging the value of those emotions, because all emotions are useful and necessary for us and normal. And the second thing that I would say is being mindfully aware of our emotions is so key. Being mindfully aware of all of them, and at the same time acknowledging that our emotions are not facts. They are like waves. They rise and they dissipate, which means regardless of how difficult an emotion might feel right now, we always need to remember that it is like a wave. It will go away. Eventually, an emotion will dissipate. But it's also important to acknowledge that they're not facts and we're not our emotions. So one of the things that we can start changing, and this is very simple, very practical, we can all start noticing our language. How do we refer to emotions? We tend to say, I'm sad, for example, I'm disappointed. I would argue, actually consider changing the way you talk about your emotions. Remember that you are not your emotions. So instead of saying I am sad, you can say I feel sad. Instead of saying I'm disappointed, you can say I feel disappointed. And it's okay to feel that way, but it's important to remember that we are not our emotions. And the last thing that I want to share before we go to questions, and please do pop your questions in the Q&A box if you want me to answer some questions. It's almost time to do that. The last thing that I wanted to share with you is the value of positive emotions, and really understanding that positive emotions are like nutrients to the brain. And there's some great research in emotion science. Dr. Barbara Fredrickson, another key name in positive psychology in particular, and she's devoted the vast majority of her career to studying emotions, and in particular to studying positive emotions. And we now know a lot more about positive emotions in particular, such as the ones that you see there on the slide. Someone is asking me to repeat her name, Dr. Barbara Fredrickson. And I have a slide with some references as well at the end that I'm very happy to show on the screen. But one of the things that we know now is that positive emotions are like nutrients to the brain. They not only help us feel good in the moment, but they also broaden our awareness and increase our thought action repertoire, our ability to think and do things. Positive emotions actually help us build enduring resources. Now, we've always seen, and those 10 positive emotions that you see there on the slide are 10 positive emotions that Dr. Barbara Fredrickson has studied, those 10 in particular, and looked at how we tend to appraise those emotions and what the result tends to be when you experience each of those emotions. Now, we've traditionally seen positive emotions as markers of well-being. They signal flourishing, right? When someone is really flourishing and operating at a great capacity and delivering great results, one of the consequences of that is that we feel really good and we start feeling lots of emotions like gratitude or joy or pride, all of those important positive emotions that generate and boost our well-being. Now, what we know now is that that's not the whole story. And actually, positive emotions not only signal well-being and flourishing, but they create well-being. They actually produce flourishing, which is really, really key. They have this ability to, there's a great TED talk by Sean Achor, Achor, and he wrote a book called The Positive Advantage. And in his book and in his TED talk, he goes into a bit of detail on some of the research and evidence that shows that the brain at its positive state is at least 31% more productive than the brain at its negative or neutral state. And essentially, there are all sorts of mechanisms that take place in our brains when we experience these positive emotions that mean that actually we're able to think better, more creatively. Why? Because these positive emotions actually impact the part of our brains that is the sort of the fear switch that we looked at earlier, the amygdala. So when you're experiencing joy, inspiration, interest, hope, amusement, that actually has the ability to decrease the activity in your limbic system, which means it helps to normalize your stress response system. Positive emotions actually create well-being because they impact your internal stress response system. They help you calm down. They help you, therefore, become more productive, more creative, access your prefrontal cortex, and use your rational thinking. And there's her name, by the way, for those of you who asked for her name, Dr. Barbara Fredrickson. So one last thing that you can do that I wanted to share with you is, for example, really simple tool, consider creating a positive emotions portfolio. And this is really about, again, trying to help you focus on positive emotions. Choose 5 that you would like to focus on 1 week, and do this for a week, okay? So choose the emotions that you'd like to experience more in your life, such as, for example, gratitude, joy, whatever. Then create a positive emotions portfolio. It could be a playlist of songs that help you feel those emotions. It could be a collection of pictures or videos or letters, or it could be a book that helps you feel, or a poem that helps you feel that emotion that you're trying to boost. Then store it in a place where it's accessible for you easily every day. So ideally your phone, or something where you can just look at it every single day. And then for a week, practice it, review it for at least 10 minutes, and really make sure that at the end of the week you take time to reflect on what worked, what didn't work, adjust your positive emotions portfolio, and you can either keep that one going or choose different emotions at another time when you feel a bit down and you feel like you yourself need a boost of positive emotions. And again, they're like nutrients to our brains. So lastly, before we go to questions, a couple of thoughts to help us consider our next steps. So first of all, notice your successes with all of these things that we looked at. Noticing when you actually practice something and you achieve a good result, it actually encourages you and it shows you the progress that you've made. Be gentle with yourself. You're on a journey, and that takes time and it takes effort. And lastly, remember to practice. Whatever you take from this talk, even if it's just one small thing, practicing it will actually make it grow, and it will further your progress significantly. So this is what we looked at today. 2 simple keys for mental well-being: focus and narrative. Choosing what we focus on and managing our own narrative. And for the emotional piece, the understanding that all of our emotions are useful and important and relevant, engaging in all of them, and also being intentional about experiencing positive emotions every day, because we know that they are so valuable and so useful for us in terms of our health and well-being. So which of these do you need to unlock this year right now? So take time to reflect on that for yourself and consider your first step. And I wanted to pause here to go to questions. And I know that some of you may have put your question in the chat box, but the chat box has so much information now with all of your great comments that it's actually easier if you pop the questions in the Q&A box. And Victor, who is still on the call, I believe, he will let me know what questions we have. We still have a bit of time. We have about 11 minutes to answer questions. So Victor, over to you. What do we have?
Yes, thank you, Anna. Thank you for your message. It was quite powerful and inspiring.
Thank you.
About questions, maybe we can start with the first one. How do you stop a negative thinking pattern when it keeps coming back?
Very good question. How do you stop a negative thinking pattern when it keeps coming back? So we showed earlier the 4-step model to manage thinking patterns. Now, in those 4 steps, I think one of the main things is actually the first one, which is to notice it and relabel it. And relabeling is really about, it's putting a label on the thought. So I think one of the best things that we can do to stop a recurring negative thought that seems to keep coming back, and by the way, negative automatic thoughts they're a thing. They're an actual thing. Everyone has negative automatic thoughts. But I guess the quickest way to help us manage those is to simply notice them. So really to notice instead of, and it sounds easy, but it isn't, because no one really notices their thoughts, really. I mean, unless I tell you to notice what you're thinking right now, it's not necessarily a normal thing to do. So as humans, we just go from one thing to the next, and we're trying to interpret all the different stimuli that we have around us in our environments and in ourselves every day. And we take our thoughts at face value. That's the truth. We don't often stop to think about our thinking. But it's this metacognition, which is, by the way, something incredible and uniquely human, is the ability to think about what we're thinking and the ability to think about what other people are thinking. This requires intention. We need to be intentional to do it. So I think the first thing to do, and the main thing probably to start doing, is to get into the habit of noticing your thinking patterns. And the thing about this also, sorry, Victor, but just one more thing to answer that one, is that negative thinking patterns, the problem is the word pattern. We tend to think in an habitual way. When we talk about habits, we often talk about actions, things that we do, but actually the way we think is also a habit. And the thing about habits is that when you do a habit, habits are incredibly energy efficient. Habits are very automatic. They require very little energy from your brain. For example, when you do a habit, you're using a part of your brain that is called the striatum, which sits very deeply in the brain. It sits in what is called the reptilian brain, which is the most primitive part of our brains. It's the part of your brain that you share with reptiles and birds, for example. And it's very, very primitive, very energy efficient. So you just naturally do a habit without thinking, without any effort. To break a habit requires every single ounce of cognitive energy in your brain, because you need to activate another part of your brain. So it's really important that it will take energy and it will take effort to break that negative pattern, but we can do it.
Thank you. I think we have another question linked to just what you said. Somebody asked, what are effective tools to become aware of feelings or thoughts that block us from pursuing well-being? So you already answered a little bit, but can you add something?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the one very simple tool that we didn't expand on this talk, but it's implicit in the tools that I shared, is questions. Questions are an incredible way to shift our thoughts in particular, because every time you're asked a question, your brain will naturally channel everything into finding the answer to that question. So it's the quickest way to change your thinking is actually to ask yourself a different question. For example, if you're stuck in a negative thought, ask yourself, what is the evidence for this thought? Or ask yourself, what would my best friend say about this, about me? I'm thinking this about me, but actually, what would my best friend say about me right now? Would they say this? So really, sometimes asking that sort of question will very quickly help you change your thoughts, because your brain will naturally search for the answer to the question. And the quickest way to change your emotions can sometimes be to change your body, because actually emotions are you experience emotions in your body. So if you change your posture, or if you change your body, that can sometimes be a very quick way to shift an emotion or a feeling. So go to the physiological sensations and do something different. Sometimes it's like you do another behavior and your emotions and your thoughts will follow. So instead of, it's almost like instead of, most of us get stuck in, I don't feel like doing this, so I'm not going to do it. And actually, I would challenge you with that, and I will say, don't wait to feel the urge to do it. Actually, do it first, and then your emotions and your thoughts will follow.
So we talk a lot about having so many negative emotions, but how about managing the lack of emotional energy, like apathy?
Like what? Sorry.
The lack of mental, emotional energy.
Oh yes, the lack of
Yes, sorry.
yeah. Well, that's a good question as well. I think all the things that I shared today are things that are appropriate for people who are sort of who are not experience any mental health challenges. And it's important to note that we didn't, this is not about giving any sort of personal advice in particular for mental health problems. Now, we all navigate, we all go from one point to the other in what we call the mental health continuum. There's like a continuum between good mental health and poor mental health that we all experience and go from one end of that continuum to the other at any time in our lives. And it's normal. It's normal to feel depressed when things are really difficult. It's normal to feel great when things are great. But when we feel sad or anxious or depressed because things are feeling difficult, that doesn't necessarily mean that we have a mental illness. But I think there are lots of things that we need to be very aware of when it comes to emotional energy. And one of them is, if you're feeling feelings of, negative feelings and negative thoughts and feeling very depressed for a long period of time, and you're unable to shake those feelings and you're unable to put yourself back together again, then that could be an indication that you're experiencing challenges that require further support. So it's important to mention that these things are things that would work for people who are experiencing sort of what we call the kind of the normal functioning, trying to handle the normal stresses and pressures of life.
Thank you. Maybe we have time for last questions.
Yep. One more only. We have 3 minutes.
So
many questions. Sorry.
Yeah. Do we have to postulate that every emotion is good or bad? Or do you think there is something in the middle? Somebody just write that Susan David thought that. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's true. I said it very briefly earlier that some of the research on emotion science refers to some of the emotions as positive and others as negative, but that shouldn't be understood as a value judgment. And in fact, all emotions, that refers to the types of physiological, behavioral, and cognitive responses that some of those emotions generate. For example, joy generates a type of response that is very different from fear, for example. So negative, what the emotion scientists refer to as negative emotions are the ones that tend to get you to act very quickly and focus on danger, for example, and respond very quickly, versus positive emotions that tend to create a response that is more long-term and it's more sort of balanced. But having said that, I love the work from Susan David. She's one of the references that I mention here on this slide. And her work on emotional agility is absolutely relevant for this as well. And some of the stuff that I mentioned earlier comes from her research and her work. So absolutely, all emotions are normal. They're all useful. They're all relevant for us. And it's our job to manage our emotions in a way that is productive and positive and conducive to our well-being.
Thank you. So we're just right on time. Maybe we can conclude.
Absolutely.
For all attendees, I can remind you all that we will be sharing the recording online on our website. So if you have more questions, don't hesitate to just comment the link.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you can also find me on the website as well, turningpointleadership.com. If you have any further questions, I'd be very happy to support, to help. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, obviously. And do reach out, stay in touch. Thank you so much for being with us today. It was wonderful to see your names. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Everyone. Thank you.